Okay, I think we are live now. Welcome everybody to the Google Hangout of the MIT MOOC that Otto and his team was leading. I hope you can all hear me. So I'm really excited about this opportunity. There is an opportunity for you to add questions. Bea, are we on air? I hope you hear us now. And Michaela, I see also a comment from you. I hope you can hear us now. Friedhelm, I will come to your question in a minute. So this Google Hangout basically has two focus areas. One, it looks into values-based banking, which is my focus area. The other one is to talk concretely about an application that of Theory U for developing a strategy in a value-based bank. And I'm not sure how familiar you all are with value-based banking. I'll just pull up a brief slide to show you, to introduce you a little bit to what we are talking about. So you've all be familiar with the conventional banking world and all these issues, and I'm working with a group that's called the Global Alliance for Banking on Values, gabv.org. You can find that find their website, and this is a network of 27 banks, and their purpose is to innovate a different type of banking. Innovate is broad because most of these banks are actually quite old. One even was founded 100 years ago. We all know that banks were often founded to serve a certain community. And just a brief summary, so all the funding or all the money they handle goes directly into social or environmental enterprises. So they follow the triple bottom line approach. And their purpose is to transform banking to serve their local communities. And with that, it means it's not a short term, we go in and out, but we develop a long-term relationship. And to do this, their work is aiming to be transparent. So one bank I work with, Triodos Bank in the Netherlands, for example, has a Google map that shows all their loans. So you can basically go on their website and see, I'm trying to get back to you, you know, you put in your name, and then you or you put in your location, and then you basically see what they're funding. So transparency is basically the counterbalance to conventional banks who pretend to be this black box. You put in your money, but you actually don't really know where it goes. This is the business of the bank. Sustainable banking, in contrast to that, means that their role is to create a connection between your deposits and loans that they give out. So that's one of the core principles. Another core principle of what these banks are doing is that they stay away from speculative investments, but they connect to the real economy, which is a big issue, and also connects to the question that Friedrich, you were asking, what happens with these low interest rates. It's a huge issue. So you can't, so their banking model is basically based on the assumption that there is a difference between the interest they pay for your deposits and the interest they get for the loans, but with this small interest rate at the moment, their business model is really at risk. And I will go into this into more detail later on. So let me see, there were some questions that are coming in. Greetings from Copenhagen. Yeah. So so the increased capital requirements, Friedhelm, and I'm quickly touching on that. I'm aware not everybody is really into this details of the banks. That's definitely a big issue. These banks are usually much smaller. So my last thing I want to say about banks is I think culturally we are used to consider banking and finance something that we are not familiar with. So, you know, you have to have a degree in finance in order to really understand how banks operate. That's what I at least experience very often. Value-based banks try to break through this pattern and invite people to think about, you know, what does your money do when it's not in your pocket? And that's a core question of value-based banking. And I think with what's happening right now, crowdfunding, for example, there are a lot of examples where people re-own their responsibility for the money they basically have. The second thing I want to say is that you can't innovate without value-based banks, because you really need banks that will focus on the content of the investment. So conventional banks often standardize; they are not really interested in the details. The more conventional your business, the better for them, because then they have low costs. It's easier to give out a $300 million loan than $301 million loans, because you only need one loan officer in the first case and several loan officers in the second case. All these structural issues with banking point against value-based banking, where you really want someone who understands the context and brings a specific intention, you know, an interest in the community into the loan decision. So I'm just checking your Q&A whether there's anything. Yeah. So feel free to just bump in questions, and I try to refer to that. So the story that I like to share today is a project that I did in a value-based bank. It's a European bank, around 1,000 co-workers, and it's an application of Theory U and Present Thing in a strategy development process. And we decided to develop something that we called a 10-year perspective. So basically we combined scenario planning with Theory U and Present Thing. So what do you do when you have no idea what the future will bring, and where you might reconsider the whole purpose of your business? And we developed a process, and I will put up a slide for you to see that. It's further down here. So this is a timeline of the strategy process that we engaged in. When you look at the top line, you see co-initiating, co-sensing, co-inspiring, co-creating, co-evolving, which basically follows the U process. So we took a core group from this bank, from all parts of this bank, and decided to use the present and at the same time use learnings from the scenario work. And we had several workshops, and in between we went to learning journeys and developed 4 possible scenarios of the future. And the purpose of that was to actually go really deep into extreme possibilities of how the future could look like. So we developed 4 scenarios. One, for example, was that big business becomes much more dominant in the future. So the extreme scenario was Google, Amazon, and Unilever merge and create this big business. So what are the options for a sustainable and green business in a scenario like that? And then we went to the other extreme. So business stays small, but the government sector becomes completely dominant. What is our possibilities there? And then a third scenario where civil society became really strong and government gives up, they can't handle the issues anymore. So you have a bottom-up movement that's really proactive and helping. And just going through your questions again, whether I can pick up anything from that. But it seems to be mainly technical issues. So who were the participants in the process, Michaela? So we invited people from the executive levels, but then also from all parts of the business. So the loan officer, someone from HR, someone who's younger and new in the organization, someone who has been this dinosaur in the organization, has been there for 12 years. And together, so the first start was really to create a group among this diverse group of participants so that they can trust each other. And then we identified core driving forces. So what do we think is happening, what do we see happening today that will have an impact on the future? And what is our official future? So what's our assumption of how the future will be? So we had an intense 2-day workshop where we identified core driving forces. So political issues, economic issues, social issues. So what's happening today, technology developments that will have demographics, will have a big impact in the future. And then we started to set up work groups, and they first did the research, the background research, and then they went out to what we call extreme users. The extreme users are groups, for example, in technology, that are far advanced users in this area. And then we brought them together. We saw, what was happening. We redefined what we were seeing, and then we did a second time learning journeys where we went in depth out there. Just checking the Q&A here again, whether there's anything that comes up for you here. I'm interested in knowing your opinion, impact, crowdfunding, etc. I think Jose Maria, that's your question. Exactly. So, what I see in the value-based, a lot of value-based banks, that they have not connected to the crowdfunding movement. And there are reasons for that. Some are bureaucratics, like regulators don't allow them, or only allow them only in a limited way in some countries, especially European countries, to go into the crowdfunding. But I also feel it's a generational issue, so that the executive level has no connection to this movement. I think they're currently waking up to what's happening there. What I like about the crowdfunding is the connection between those that receive the funds and those that invest. So you move out of this idea of standardizing the financial transaction, and you are trying to make connections. Also, the electronic money, what I see is in South America, Africa, and some Asian areas, electronic money using your phone for banking transaction is really advanced. If you are interested in that, look into Peru. I think they create a collective platform on a nationwide level, which I think is really interesting and very unique. Or another really interesting example, if you're interested in that, is BRAC Bank in Bangladesh, who work with BRAC, the NGO, and use mobile banking to actually reach out to the communities that are completely disconnected from the center, small villages. So I think crowd-lending electronic money has real potential to reconnect banking to the real needs. At the same time, I also see the big players moving in there. I see Facebook and Google applying for banking licenses, and I'm concerned about the intention that they bring into this. So at the end of the day, this is emerging and not really. Yeah, so this development is still open and can go both ways. That's what I'm seeing. So Michaela, trusts seem to be really important. Yes, in this group. So I'm going back to this example. We had different hierarchies, and sending them on learning journeys together really helped with the trust. We also, I don't know whether you're familiar with Arowana Hayashi's work. She developed something that's called social presencing theater, and we used that. So we had the group at one afternoon taking different roles of the system. So I'm the customer, I'm the regulator, I'm the unemployed youth that can't get access to finance, I'm this foundation who doesn't know how to best invest. And we did social presencing theater with them, where they had to represent these different perspectives. And that was a process that really increased the trust. I would say, so I think we had 5 workshops. I think it took us at least two to really go deep and create this trust. So Ralph, the challenge is how to include technology in the business without losing the value-based banking model. Yes, exactly. I work with this group of 27 value-based banks, and staying connected to the values continuously is a challenge. It's a challenge in how you hire, it's a challenge how you develop your financial products. There is no easy answer or remedy. So I'll just give you an example. Several of these banks, for example, refuse to identify lending criteria. And they do this because they realize the moment I give criteria, so we lend to organizations who do A, B, C, D, that moment the conversation stops. So what they give is minimum, so you wouldn't invest in whatever, weapon industry, you give some minimum criteria that are very obvious. But at the end of the day, it's really about the loan offer saying yes to a project. So when you talk about, technology has to be adopted to values, what I learned in my work with these value-based banks is that values is something that you need to discuss and make alive. The moment you have a list, this is over. So one of the banks in this discussion said, my real question is, to every investment I make, does it make sense? At the end of the day, that's the question I put on my table. I don't have a list of 5 criteria. The question is, does it make sense? And yeah, I hope that helps. So let me see. These are some questions. All right. Thank you, Bruno. Yeah, so GABV, Ellen, is really interesting. Carsten, thank you for your comment. Merkur, yeah, I know them well. It's a really interesting and fast-growing Danish bank. So let me go back to this process. So the big challenge that personally, when I facilitate the U process, the hardest piece for me is always this co-inspiring, deepest point. So we had that in the middle of the process, the co-inspiring in June, July. So if I were to summarize what happens for me in this is often that you go in, you have all these ideas, you're fully energized, and suddenly you come to this point where you have to crystallize that and really bring it down to, what's my conclusion from all of that? And Otto in Theory U describes this as letting go. I personally experience this often as being a little painful. You're disoriented. you feel now you would, the big thing is going to happen and you should really understand what the direction is. And letting go really means to stay in this moment of unclarity, of emerging ideas, of fear, is this, especially when you're there, with a client and you have to deliver. Okay, is something coming out of that? So you can then jump and just create an answer. But my experience is that then you basically continue with the old pattern. So to keep this openness and this emptiness for a while and really accept that you have to ponder this for a while and to listen to your voices, to listen to the voices of others, I, as a facilitator in a process like that, find really scary and difficult. That's my facilitation perspective. So I see, Bea, you have a question around the scenarios. So the 4 scenarios were: 1, government gets really big. And the scenarios are always extreme perspectives. So scenarios are not a description of how the future will be. The scenarios are basically pulling your thinking into extreme perspectives of what could happen. So one is business gets really big. The other one is government becomes really dominant. It sounds easy. It's a much longer story. How this would happen, what would be the triggering events, and then what would be the consequences for value-based banking. And then the third one we call happy, unhappy community, is that there will be a polarization in our society. So civil society will be strong, but there will be an in and an out group. So you have communities that will work well, have a reasonable income, but then there will be outsiders who never make it into the community. And then the 4th scenario, which again is an extreme scenario, basically is this dream scenario of a balance between business, government, civil society, and an awareness of our social and ecological issues. People innovate. And the interesting thing for the value-based bank in that scenario was that then suddenly they are not the poster childs that are exceptional in their performance, but in regard to social and ecological issues, but suddenly you have a lot of competitors in this field. So that was the 4th scenario. So that's in regard to Bea, your question. Okay, with that, I'm just scanning your questions. Crowdfunding, I think we had that. Yeah, Ralph, I'm not sure about your question. Small banks has to answer whether they can carry the required investment. I don't know. I think they need partners, platforms between. I mean, I think, Ralph, what you're referring to is that values-based banks are often much smaller than conventional banks, and the question is, how can they stay competitive in this environment? My experience is that customers are, in a way, very aware of this, and they compete in a different market than conventional banks. They often have a lot of local knowledge, let's say about renewable energy, about microfinance, etc., etc. And a loan officer doesn't just bring the financial knowledge to the table, but brings a lot of this specialized knowledge to the table. And with that, automatically addresses a different market. Yeah. All right. So so with that, going back to this strategic planning process, we moved then at the end of the year into the prototyping process, and we did this by inviting 70 people from the organization and outside of the organization to a one-day big event, which was really fun. What we did was we created 4 rooms in a big commercial building where we recreated the 4 scenarios. So you went into the room and you watched a BBC newscast, and you had people in this room that basically enact the situation in this scenario. And the goal was to really let go of the thinking of the future and put yourself into an extreme version and step out of your conventional thinking. And then each group went to all of these 4 rooms, which was really interesting. And then we brought them all together and started a brainstorming process on possible financial products, strategic decisions, reactive strategic decisions, generative strategic decisions, small initiatives, low-hanging fruit. So we had this whole day of brainstorming and thinking together, and that then got crystallized by a subgroup, brought to the executive board, and is now in the process of that these different prototypes are launched. So that's a rough description. I think what I did, 2 things. One is I touched a little bit on value-based banking, and I'm personally really passionate about value-based banking because I believe that we can't address the social and ecological issues we have without financial institutions that focus their activities on these issues, because conventional banks naturally have the objective to maximize their profit, and they don't do it by combining their investment with an intention. So and that's in the nature of what money actually is. So I think if we are concerned about our social and ecological future, we need value-based banks. And the second thing that I touched on was a process that we used in a value-based bank where we used the ideas of theory and presencing to develop a new strategy and a long-term perspective. With that, I could continue forever, but I think I would like to see whether you have any questions. Yeah, so Katrin, that's true. So we stepped into these different scenario rooms. We don't have that on our website. Unfortunately, it's internal within the organization. They will put this on their website, I think, after their next meeting. So I would say it's March. In April, it's on their website, and then I'll put it on the PI site. Any other questions here? No, I don't think so. All right. Okay, so then if you don't have any questions, I just conclude with some final ideas on value-based banking. Let me go up here. So to summarize the core characteristics of the value-based banks I work with is that they work with transparency, that they're full reserve banks, so their loans are funded through savings. They are focused all their investments on social and environmental projects. They have specific expertise in the area, so they combine the banking business also with having explicit knowledge in certain areas. They are focused on the real economy and don't invest in derivatives. what I also find in these banks is that those that work well basically practice what they preach. So their building are also low energy, and the way they treat and work with their co-workers represents the way they think about social issues. So yeah, so that's another summary of what I've said, that I think banking is essential in the economy because of their role as intermediaries. So if we want to address the issues, we need to look into the banking sector. And without loans that are focused on social and ecological innovations, I don't think we can address the issues that we have. All right, everybody. I hope. Oh, Lily just said there are questions coming in. All right. I don't see them, Lily. Not sure. The last question I have is by Bia. I scroll down, and then Catherine. So, Carsten, maybe your question: how do you sense what we can do locally, connect with a global level? So the idea of this banking network is to give these small local banks a global voice. And I also see with social media that, when you look at how they operated 10 years ago and how they operate today, they definitely have a global impact. And I also see that the story of how they operate is being used globally. So I think there's this strong connection there. Other questions? I mean, Lily, if you see another question, I'm happy. Maybe you can highlight it. No, I don't see any additional questions at this point. All right. With that, thank you so much for your time. And we will keep updates on the Presencing website, and enjoyed hearing your questions, and feel free to contact us in the future. Thank you so much.